My name is Kylema Norman, and this is the new normal. So today we're going to have guests, moi. It's Kylema's Corner. So I'm going to give you just a rundown of what's on my mind about a specific topic. And today's topic is going to be love. I'm really big into love. I was fashioned in love. As fairy tales come, my father and mother were not. But there's a story that both of them have independently told me when they were alive, that they were childhood sweethearts and then got lost through time, taking different paths and roads, given the various things that were happening in Brownsville, Brooklyn during the 1950s and 60s, and then met back up in the late 70s, because I'm born in 79, where my dad had taken a wife and had also an older child. So he had two children. And then he met back up with my mom, and they had me. And my mom at the time, her name is Elaine Dixon-Cully, beautiful woman. But this is the love affair that they had, right? And so it wasn't perfect. And so when they met back up, he was already married. He had an older child that came pre-marriage. Love my sister Tamika. I love all my sisters, although I don't have a relationship with all of them, because that's love has taken a different form and effect when you have outside children such as me. And he asked her to have a baby. She had just finished graduating college, and she also went to the Air Force, and she could find no jobs. So in 1978, when she was got pregnant with me, she wasn't a younger woman. She was about 27, going to be 28. And so she was very turned off by life. Elaine felt like, what more could society want from me? Having graduated high school, have a bachelor's degree, and been in the Air Force, like can't find a job, like what's going on? So when your childhood sweetheart proposes this notion that life is going to take on a new course if you just have a baby and be this family with them, it seemed like a good idea at the time. She always said, even on her deathbed, even on my father's deathbed, that it was one of the best decisions that he convinced her of. And so, I take that fairy tale and I fashion it. Now, I have 4 other brothers and sisters, 1 brother and 3 other sisters. And I'm sure their account of my father may or may not be mine. It took me a lot of years to reconcile growing up predominantly with my mom, because my father had a drug issue that later became an AIDS issue. And so he died of the symptom of AIDS. And he came back to live with us when I was 12. And it was very rough. I don't know why he made the decision to come to Elaine's house, but she took him in. And for years, I'm 41 now, it took me 37 years to figure out how in the world would she make the decision to let him stay. So when my father came to live with us, his name is William Thomas Murray, that's my dad. The stories are crazy, but I have such a love for him and for my mom, Elaine, because if it wasn't for that love, that passion that they had, I wouldn't be here. And I wouldn't have had the experiences I had to make me the person I am today. And although my experiences and stories, some people be like, oh my gosh, you telling all of that? It has created in me an individual who can only express that love is the answer. Love is the way. Love is the only business I want to be about. And it's not a mamsy-pamsy feeling. I'm not talking about that love, but I'm talking about the patience and the kindness and the forgiveness and the no grudge holding and the excitement and the passion, for the love of it all. That's, I got all of that from them and from their experience, because it fashioned in me some things that I had to contend with, that in overcoming them, I can talk to you about love. So my father decided he was going to come, and he forgot to tell my mother he had AIDS, not HIV, he had AIDS. And my mother found out in a hairdresser. Now, I don't know who's watching, but if you have ever been in a Black woman's hair salon, that is not the place to discover that your baby father is in the home with the AIDS virus, or having AIDS. And so I'll never forget that day. My mother, half of her hair was pressed, the other half was kinky, and she packed me up and we left out of the hair salon after a woman had came in to give an account of how my grandmother, she called my grandmother by name, Bertha Brown, has this son who has the AIDS, and she won't call her up at being that she has her grandchild and to tell her that this is true. The woman was just telling a story, and my mother discovered it, and we got it out of the hair salon, and World War III ensued in the home. My mom went through his things. Now, my father, I mean, I'm sure his 4 other children could testify, loved the briefcase. He was a particular type of man, you know, very concerned about his way of dress, very immaculate, and he was very handsome, like, you know, like, oh, he's cute, or he's fine, like that kind of way. And so for his briefcase to be broken into was another travesty, never mind that it was holding the documents. It was like straight out of La Novella or a Tyler Perry's sitcom. She breaks it open with the screwdriver and a hammer to pop the lock. She looks through it, and then she finds it, and all hell breaks loose. And I mean, at that time, he had been staying with us, and it was very different because, like I said, it was 12. So he'd been in and out. My mom had gotten married, so I had the pleasure of having a stepfather. I could tell you about those things. He wasn't Joseph from the Bible with Jesus, but he, you know, stepfathers, that's a precarious situation for any household, step-parenting. I mean, that's another show, how to be an amazing step-parent, right? But nevertheless, I've had the pleasure of having him as a stepfather. And then, so it was either my dad back and forth or my stepfather. My mom was very cautious about who she let in my life. She always wanted it to be stable. She used to tell me all the time, Khalima, run your house like a library. You know, keeps kids sane. And I agree now. But for the love of it all, she didn't put him out even after she found out that he was hiding this terrible, terrible secret. And I had no understanding. Like, it broke me. It broke me. He had been there for some time, and him and I were clashing because, of course, I was way too fresh, way too rude in reflection, not in the moment. In the moment, I just thought I had all right and power to challenge him. Where have you been? You don't show up for birthdays. You don't, you know, like just going in. And they had the bright idea one day to sit me down and have like a family discussion as to why he's here. And I leaned into them and said some vile, mean, nasty things. Boy, nobody should ask a 12-year-old to speak their mind and not give parameters for conversations. I'm just going to say. And so I could see the hurt in them, but they asked and I told. And so it was a very tumultuous 2 years. My mom constantly explaining to me how love allows you to conquer and to forgive, and me constantly looking at her and saying, lady, you crazy. I don't understand what kind of love you're working with, but that's not my definition of love. If you love me enough, he wouldn't be here, because at that time, we really had no idea about what all AIDS could do and how you can contract it. And so I grew up in Brownsville, borderline Flatbush, depending on how you look at it. I say Brownsville, some people say Flatbush. It's Rockaway Parkway and Church, shout out to the 90s, I'm from there. But people knew what to say. Wherever I grew up, people were aware that my father had AIDS, and so the stigma of it, people knew my father was a drug addict because he would get high and be on the nod. He did go to rehab while he was with us. That was one of her stipulations. So he was part of the methadone clinic in Harlem. Shout out to Harlem. But nevertheless, they helped him greatly. They had great counseling. I remember one time my mother was trying to get me to do counseling. I was like, I'm not going to talk to nobody. I don't understand why he's here, choosing here to die. Wherever he was before, he should die there. And I said these things, very hurtful, but for the love, right? So for the love of it all, my mother endured. We were with him until the day that he took his final breath. I went for a track meet. I was in the 9th grade. I came home and he was had expired in the bedroom. And I just remember the pain on my mother's face. That years from then, I would liken it to like the same kind of pain that anybody, when they lose someone that they hold dear to them, you know, has or experience, you know. It was a painstaking situation from top to bottom. And, you know, I talked to my older sister, and I've spoken to my brother when I was very, very younger, but I haven't had the privilege of us, all five of us, being together. And it becomes very difficult when, you know, you are a disjointed family. And my father said one of his regrets, and he said this openly to me and my husband, who was then my boyfriend at the time, is that all his children weren't in one place, because every woman, which is four of them, you know, have a grudge about not being the one he decided to settle with, or at the time, or just being the one for them and showing up. But I have no grudge against my dad, because he taught me so many things. For his love for me in the midst of his battling drugs and battling the sickness, he always made sure we had money. Like, my father was very, very succinct in making sure that his weekly checks showed up. And when he knew he was dying, he ensured that the supplements that we received weekly would automatically go to us up until we were 21. As long as we could prove we were in school from 18 to 21. So he looked out for us financially the best way he knew how. Like, everything my father did, William Thomas, it was the best he knew how. He came up from the South with his mother. She had him at 13. Not excuses, but there was no parenting paradigm or model for him to view. And so, you know, he did what he knew would be the best by us, which is to make sure I was born Kylima Dixon. That couldn't stay. He went to the courts, and I have that paper where my mother and him, you know, I've spoken to both of them, not now, not like recently, maybe in my dreams, right? But not, they've been gone for some time, but, thank you, Mira. But nevertheless, he made sure I had his last name, you know, because that mattered where we grew up. In Brownsville, having your father's last name, having your father send his checks, even though his presence wasn't there all the time, was necessary. And I can actually say, in middle school, he made my graduation. He made recitals, dance recitals, my instrument recitals. So although he wasn't consistent in like the big birthday bang or Christmas bang, I remember him and have pictures and evidence of him being there for different parts of my life. His love for me was not shown in a very affectionate way, I would say. He was not a hugger or a kisser, but then when I would go out partying, which I know you're saying 12 to 14, in those days, you know, I partied, he would be up at the edge of the bed waiting for me to come in, you know. Whenever I stayed out too late, he would walk to the park to make sure I came back. So that's a love, you know, like protection and oversight. And listen, all of this I'm telling you, I promise you, I had no idea these things were evidence of love, because the affection lacked. And I think a lot of the times with human beings, if you don't have that affection, people can say that you're not loving. But I've seen people be affectionate and make some real grotesque decisions and perform some actions that are not loving. So I've come to the appreciation of my father's showing up in the spaces and places in which he did. And so I love William Thomas Murray. He is one of my first heroes. A man of his caliber, he made sure, even though he went to jail and served time, he graduated with a bachelor's degree and became a social worker. He worked in I don't know, you know, if you're all New York based, but in New York, the welfare center was downtown Brooklyn. My father worked in there. And as the story tells, but this is a story I had from my grandmother, he was so well-versed in using the computer that was one of his main jobs, was to input data into the computer, which was like profound back then. We're talking about in the 80s, right? Where the computer is this huge, big box, a Commodore, or personal computers had just came out, like a Commodore 64, but the understanding and the conceptualization of it, most people had no knowledge about. So he was a man of his time. He was also very much into Black power. Like, he believed that being Black meant certain things, like you were always immaculate, that you always showed up, with the right answers at the right time. It was a demeanor. His drug battle was a result of a lot of people's drug issues at that time, where the government had decided to fund its wars across seas by dropping heroin in the areas such as Brownsville, where my father came from. And so my mother and father both had drug problems, and my mother was able to recover and be this amazing teacher in the community who used her story of battle and strife to help inform others. She never held that a secret. I had these issues and I'm able to overcome. But my mother didn't believe that you pulled yourself up by your bootstrap. She believed for the love of it all. And so it was through this love that she fashioned and formed me. And she was with me until I was 24, as I say, that's like 16 years ago. And this notion of forgiveness that later on I would have to ask of my husband to give me, right? Because in a marriage, which I understood the point of getting married, right? Like I picked that up out of my childhood. What I didn't understand is how to be married. And to be married and to have a marriage are two different things, because one is an act of love, and the other is an act of, how do you say, I don't even speak another language, but compliance. So marriage can be, or like any relationship, where I check boxes, or it can be an act of love, where you apply that patience, forgiveness, no grudge holding, excitement, all of the things that have nothing to do with an emotion, but everything to do with an act. So Bell Hooks has a book out now. Not now, it's been revitalized, it's been out for years, but people are talking about it now because she talks about love being an action. So later in my life, 37, this same act of love that my mother had to give my father, my husband, Bobby Norman, whose birthday it is today, he's 44, had to give to me. And it was upon that understanding of the love that he had to show me in forgiveness and kindness and no grudge holding, that it illuminated for me for the very first time in my life what my mother sacrificed for my dad. And now my mother was not like crazy. When my father lived there with AIDS, we were very much a bleaching household. I don't know if anybody's grown up with an Elaine, but I'm sure you have one, where you cough, she sprays bleach. Where you use a fork, it gets bleached. Clothes gets bleached, whether it's color or white, everything is bleach, 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 right? My mother would, I go back to think as a mom and as a mate to someone who is sick with something who could possibly contagious, right? Because we didn't know that it was a bloodborne issue 100%. We just still didn't know. Even back then, she would wake up and bleach the bathroom, and then I would go in. She would bleach everything. Like my father wasn't allowed to cook in the kitchen for fear that if he cut himself or something, he wasn't there, and he complied. The bathroom was the main scene, because there's a lot of, fluids in the bath. But my mother, every time he went in, she would bleach. It was like she was on it, like all the time to ensure this safety, right? So it was crazy to think about. Then I was very angry and very upset, and I held a grudge for years and would throw it in her face a lot. And she's dead and gone, and I've released that so I can talk about it freely because she forgave me, and I forgive myself. But in my misunderstanding of what love and relationships is, is as a definition, I then proceeded not to know how to love my husband. Can you imagine? All that hurt and anger ended up becoming my personal actions that I then put on to someone else and cause pain. That's why this forgiveness factor in love has to be like the most prominent thing that we activate, because it's not for the other person, it's really for you. So I proceeded to I met my husband at 12. My husband knows my dad. I knew my husband before my dad came to live with us with AIDS. And if it wasn't for my husband's protection, I would have been violated as a kid. But I was never teased. I grew up in actual love, and I don't have a mental block because the people that I grew up with are still very much alive, and they will testify that too. We all grew up in love. No one said, "Oh, your father with the AIDS," or made fun. I never had to fight or was bullied. And people knew because my father went to the hospital up the block, Brookdale, who family in the community worked at. So it wasn't like a secret. And then when he would take his methadone treatments, it's taking heroin. So he would be on the nod outside. So people would see that drunken, the nod is like that motion that drug addicts or heroin addicts get where they like, do the lean and then, they don't touch anything. And so he would do this on Rockaway Parkway. And if you even Google Rockaway Parkway, I'm from 466 Rockaway Parkway, it's a big behind street. Like somebody gonna see you. So all that to say, it was a lot of factors for bullying to taking place, but I never saw them. And I was also a kid with braces. I was also a kid with glasses, and I didn't get teased. I grew up in a neighborhood where I was loved, like self-assured and confident always. I never felt any of these things detracted from who I was. I tell my story, or this story of love, because I think people need to hear what ultimate forgiveness looks like. And it looks like an act that's unconceivably unforgivable, and then you forgive. And then the releasing that came out of that was this example that I had no idea. My mother forgiving my father and allowing him to choose that space in which to transition into the next world into comfortably. We laughed, we joked. I mean, in the midst of me being a nasty little teenager, there was so much love that it would override the hate that I was trying to usher in through my misunderstanding. And who knew that would serve as an example many moons later for me to use in order to plead my case to my husband and for him to plead his case back to me and for us to have this union that, although it's 4 years away from this episode that I said that I needed this ultimate forgiveness for, it's the foundation for all who we are today as a couple. Who knew? Like the true act of love is so powerful that even after the persons who committed it are dead, that act still sends or is an example for those who are still living to use and to implement in their life. And so, for the love of it all, very powerful thing. My mom, she always raised me with a caring, kind word. And I know we speak, very nice things about dead people because it's just like, polite, but that's not me. Like this, Kylima's Corner, real people, real issues, real solutions. So she was very kind, and I can provide evidence is my point. She was very firm. I could provide evidence at points. So my mom wasn't a spanker, although I did get spanked like 3 times in my whole life, and I've done some egregious things as a kid growing up. Like one time I took her boyfriend's car and went for a joyride, Things happen when you're a kid, right? But for the love of it all. Nevertheless, she was a talker. And so she would lead by giving me these examples of how forgiveness and true patience looks like. And my father's the best example of that. And so although parenting has taken many bends in the road, I remember the love that she showed me and give it also to my kids. So this is Kylima's Corner, a quick blurb today. We're going to keep it quick when it's Kylima's Corner, but the piece that I want you to resonate with you in some corner of your mind is that when you truly love someone, forgiveness, patience, kindness, passion is not an option. So love unapologetically. Thank you.